Shalom, shalom. I want to give all praises, glory, honor, and power that's due unto Yahweh, Bahashim Yahweh Shah, Bahashim Rakha HaKadash. Double honors to the elders and apostles at Great Millstone, those who rule well and who taught me this truth. And salutations to you, brothers, stiffly pushing this one truth in all sincerity and diligence. Shalom to the rest of the one-third remnant, men, women, and children of the nation of Israel, as well as the speckled bird, Israelites who may look like the heathen, as we await this second Exodus by the hands of Yahweh Shah. This is your brother Rachagabar. All right. And as you can see by the title of this lesson, all right, what we'll all be going into today is dealing with the history of when the Edomites invaded and conquered Japheth's land. All right. And when this occurred, they became known as the classical Greeks. All right. And this is the history I want to get into today, man. You know, this has always been something I've wondered about. But when you try to do research on it and when you try to study up on it, there's not much history given. OK, this is something that Esau, in order to prevent you from connecting the dots from the Edomites to Alexander the Great. This history is pretty much being hidden. OK, it's being they don't really have much information on it. But however, we are going to go into this today. All right. And, go into the history of when the Edomites invaded the land of Japheth and essentially became the Greeks. All right. Now I want to start off with the fact that, as we understand it, after the flood during Genesis chapter 10, verses 1 through 2, this land as depicted, the European islands, all right, parts of Asia Minor, Greece, etc., was given into the hands of Japheth. Okay, this was their territory. All right. And we know that Esau descended from Shem. Okay, so when did Alexander the Great's forefathers get into this land? Right. It's not like they just randomly spawned in the land of Macedonia one day and built their first Edomite empire. All right. Then it doesn't work like that. OK, they had to have invaded and conquered these original people here. All right. And this is what we're going to cover, Lord willing, in this lesson. OK, now, as you understand it, the original Japhites, they were seafaring, dark-skinned, dark-complexioned people. All right. They would have been known as the Etruscans, the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, the Celts, the Gauls, the Pelasgians, etc. Okay. And on this map here, this is, the different parts of the European islands and surrounding territory that they would have been living in. Okay. And these were dark-skinned people, right? There's several artifacts, paintings, depictings that show these people were dark-skinned, living in these lands before any so-called white person ever got up in there. Okay. These are modern day Hawaiians and Samoans. Okay. And it makes sense because, the original Japhites were seafaring people. Okay. When you look at Hawaiians and Samoans today, they still live on those islands. Okay. Those islanders. Okay. All right. So essentially I'm going to start this lesson off, man, is I wrote down, the information that I've gathered on this subject. All right. I, wrote it down to try to, make it flow in my mind. All right. And I'm going to pretty much read from that. And Lord willing, this lesson's edifying. Okay. So I'm pretty much going to cover the several periods in Greek history. Okay. The first period we'll be dealing with the period before what they call pre-classical Greek. Okay. Which is before the Edomites ever got up in this area. Then we'll move on to the what they call the Greek Dark Ages, all right, which is after the Edomites had invaded, and then we'll go on from there. Okay, so first off, I want to read from what I wrote down here. So historians believe that around 1200 to 1100 BC, Mycenae of southern Greece was invaded by the Dorians from central Greece, known as the Dorian invasion. Okay, and this pretty much is what this lesson stems around. Okay, because this Dorian invasion here, as you're going to find out, all right, was carried out by these Edomites. Okay, so much to the degree that when you fast forward, we're going to go into Herodotus, who they call the father of history. And he was a Greek historian. All right. And he pretty much, he pretty much wrote a myth or a Greek legend of how, this land once belonged to their ancestor Hercules, and they were returning to regain or reclaim that area, right? Which we're going to go into that. So as you see depicted on this map here, Mycenae, all right, would have been in southern Greece. Okay, this would have been around where you see Peloponnesus. Okay, so I can zoom in. All right, well, I can't zoom in on it. All right, but yeah, you see the Peloponnesus, Mycenae. This was the land that was invaded by the Dorians, who were lived around central Greece. Okay. Okay, so this invasion by the Dorian kings, who were Edomites, is said to have plunged Mycenaean Greece into the Greek Dark Ages. All right, so this first period here, the Greek Dark Ages, is estimated to be around 1100 to 750 BC. All right. And essentially during this period, historians say that there's not much archaeological evidence. Like this was a period of decline for the original Greeks, and it was a period pretty much where Esau began to and this is a period pretty much where Esau were destroying previous settlements and collapsed the socioeconomic system that was originally established by Japheths. The dialect, traditions, and art all changed as well, therefore creating a period of decline for the original inhabitants of Greece as they were being replaced and or assimilated with these barbaric Edomites. Okay, so when this Dorian invasion occurred, which these historians like to place around 1200 to 1100 BC, this invasion changed the whole game. All right, this invasion changed the way of life. All right, the dialect, the traditions that were being carried out before these Edomites invaded this territory. Okay, so this marks the change of the indigenous Greeks, all right, the Japheths, to these modern day Greeks, all right, who everybody, these so-called white people that claim to be the the Greeks. Okay, and that's when you go into Alexander the Great. All right. Okay, so yeah, this was a period of destruction and decline for the original Japheths. All right, they were essentially being conquered by Esau. Okay. So after this period, all right, after this, what they call the Greek Dark Ages, you had the Archaic period, which is around 800 to 480 BC. Okay, now during this period, the Edomites, all right, under the Dorian kings, right, they then began to divide the Peloponnese, southern Greece, all right, as depicted here, and they divided Mycenae, Argos, Sparta, Athens, etc., and set up various dynasties. Which, okay, on this map it doesn't show Argos. It shows Sparta, Athens, Mycenae, but all right, but Argos is pretty much around where Mycenae and Sparta is at. Okay, so these Edomites at this time during the Archaic period, around 800 to 480 BC, began to set up these various dynasties. Okay, they had divided the land, and this is when the Greek city-states are introduced, okay, also known as the polises. And one of the most notable dynasties during this period was the quote-unquote royal Argead dynasty, okay, which that word Argead comes from the word Argos, right, which is, like I said, you don't see it depicted here on this map, but it would have been around, around this area, okay. And this was one of the most notable dynasties, the Argead dynasty, because this is the same dynasty wherein Alexander the Great derived from. Okay, and as dealing with that dynasty, it was also known as the Timonid dynasty. All right, which I found that interesting, man. When you look up the Argead dynasty, it'll tell you that it was founded in 808 BC by King Caranus. Okay, so he would have been a forefather of Alexander the Great. In that another name for the Argead dynasty would have been known as the Timonid dynasty. Okay, which I found that interesting because according to scripture, we know that Taman was a duke, chief tribe of Edom. Right, Taman was a duke, chief tribe of Edom, and it appears that is where that word Timonid derived from. Okay, so the Argead, or in other words, the Timonid dynasty, was set up during this time. Like I said, so this is during the Archaic period. All right, so this particular dynasty was founded in 808 BC by Alexander the Great's forefather and the first king of that dynasty, Karanis, and thus serves as the lineage from which Alexander came. Okay, so as we see, and I kind of, skimmed quickly over several different periods in ancient Greece, but as you see, the Greek Dark Ages were brought about by the invasion from the Dorians, okay, who were Edomite kings. Okay, in this invasion plunged Mycenaean Greece into the Dark Ages. Okay, their settlements were destroyed, their traditions, their way of life, and all of those things began to change because the Edomites were invading and they were migrating in at a rapid rate. And those indigenous Japheths who were living there, the dark-skinned people, they were either dipping out or they were assimilating. Okay, all right. So yeah. So then we go into the then we go into the fact, like I said, wherein after the Dark Ages, they have the Archaic period, which is when these Edomites really begin to set up shop. Okay, they set up dynasties in Mycenae, Argos, Sparta, Athens, etc., and they introduced those Greek city-states. And like I said, this is where you get the Argead dynasty, which is where Alexander the Great comes from. Okay, and so this leads us to the classical period, which is around 500 to 301 BC. Okay. And during this period, as we understand, this is when Alexander the Great and those Greeks, or in other words, the classical Greeks, okay, not the original Greeks indigenous to that land, but these invaders, all right, these imposters, if you will, who set up shop, okay, the Edomites. This is when they had finally got the upper hand on the Persians, okay, on the Media Persians, and this is when the Edomite dominion in their empire, this is when it began, right? Preceding a prophecy in Daniel chapter 2, as well as Daniel chapter 7. This is when, under the reign of Alexander the Great, the Edomites rose to be a great empire, okay, and we're seeing where that stemmed from. So like I said, this leads us to the classical period, which is around 500 to 301 BC. And as we know, this is when the Israelites were in captivity to the Greeks. Okay, this is when these Edomites began to put us in captivity. This is what you read about during the Maccabean period. Okay, they opened up our books, our law, start whitewashing history as they've always done. Okay, they set up gymnasiums. Okay, they profaned our temple, and you had a lot of wicked niggas that was converting over to the Greek culture. Okay, we know the Greco-Romans were big on homosexuality, idolatry, mythology, and all of those things, man. Okay, and so during this period, we were in captivity when Alexander the Great rose into power. Okay, and he stemmed from the Argead dynasty. So like I said, he was the son of Philip, and he rose to fulfill prophecy, essentially. And you have, according to a Greek myth by a Greek historian, Herodotus, as I mentioned earlier, they call him the father of history, which makes sense because this is when the Edomites, the so-called white people, this is when their dominion, their rule on the surrounding nations began. This is when it truly began, man. All right, as you're going to find out, these Edomites, according to Genesis 27 and 40, they were not given the dominion to rule until they had to serve the Israelites. Okay, and then there was going to come a point in time preceding to Genesis 27 and 40, that Esau would break that yoke of being in slavery to the Israelites from off of his neck, and they would get the dominion. Okay, and as we're going to go into, that was pretty much fulfilled around the 9th century BC. Okay, so which we're going to go into that. Okay, and it lines up with the timeline, as far as when these dynasties during the Archaic period were formed, okay, or were created. Okay, so yeah, man, let's go ahead and get back to this. So yeah, according to a Greek myth by Greek historian Herodotus, aka the father of history, he was born in 485 BC. Okay, he was an Edomite Greek. He said the Peloponnese, or southern Greece, was once inhabited by their ancestor Hercules before he was exiled, which we know Hercules to be a false Greek mythological demigod. Okay, so as you're going to see as I continue to read on, this is pretty much the myth or the fable that these Edomites have used to pretty much give reason and claim as to why they have stake in this land. Okay, because we understand they're not the true indigenous people to this land, but this is them whitewashing, fabricating history, okay, as they've done time and time again. Okay, when you read in Job chapter 9 and 24, scriptures tell you the earth is given into the hand of the wicked, and they cover up the faces of the judges thereof. Okay, so starting with the Israelites, we're the main ones during the time of the Greek captivity. They covered up the true Israelites and start painting those white images. Okay, and then we know they did that during the time of the Renaissance. Okay, you have iconoclasm, and so on and so forth, man. These Edomites tell you that they were everybody, right? They were the Egyptians. They're clearly, as we're going in this lesson, they were the Greeks, the original Europeans. But those are all lies, man. Okay, and the main thing going on today with the anti-S, they're telling you that they are the real Jews. But when you understand the history, after, during the time of the Greek captivity, you had the Maccabees who were fighting series of battles and wars, and it got to a point to where we actually pretty much got the victory over them, and we set up what is known as the Hasmonean dynasty. Okay, the Hasmonean dynasty was a dynasty by the Israelites, and within that dynasty, you had this guy named John Hyrcanus, who was an Israelite who pretty much converted Edomites into our religion, if you will. Okay, which that was going off. Okay, and when you fast forward during the time of the Dark Ages, you had Edomites, all right, who lived in the land of Khazaria, okay, which is around the Caucasus, Georgia, Russia, around that area. You had Edomites that lived in Khazaria, who adopted and converted to Judaism. Okay, and when you read through the books of Who is Esau Edom, the 13th tribe by Arthur Kessler, all right, you find out the history and the understanding that those Khazarians make up majority of modern day Jews. Okay, so modern day Jews stem from those Edomites who had converted to a religion and a faith that never belonged to them. You see, so they've always done this. They've always, taken over the identities of other nations and people groups and claim to be those people. And in this lesson, we're going into when this occurred, with the Greeks, the original, Japheth, okay, the original Greeks, okay, the original Europeans, if you will, okay, we're all dark skinned. Okay, all right, but I digress a little bit. Let's go ahead and get back to the point. So let's go ahead and go back to the point dealing with this myth that was formulated by Herodotus. This myth is known as the return of the Heraclidae, or in other words, the Dorian invasion. Okay, they when you look into the history, historians oftentimes interchange these two. Okay, the Dorian invasion is also known as the return of the Heraclidae, which means return of the Hercules. And the myth holds that at one point Hercules got into a fight. Hercules got into a fight with his cousin Eurystheus, who was the king of Mycenae, and was kicked out of that land. And later, his descendants, the Heraclidae, returned generations later to reclaim that land. You see, so this is why it tells you This is their way of saying how they had stake in that territory, right? But Hercules is all made up, man. So you see how this is a myth, all right? And historians understand that this is a myth, but they also understand that the Dorian invasion, within the myth actually did occur. Okay, you see, okay. So it says, yeah, in reality, historians, they accept the fact that the Dorian invasion did occur within this myth that was formulated by Herodotus, okay, and I believe some other Greek historians, okay, okay, but yeah, man, that is pretty much the point, spanning the time from when Japheth was given, the European islands and things after the flood, up until around around the 1200 to 1100 BC is when they say that this Dorian invasion happened. Okay, but as far as that timeline goes, we know that Scripture doesn't cover the history as far as Esau migrating north around 1200 to 1100 BC. Like, you're just not going to find that history within the Scriptures. Okay, like I said, if you try to research into things, all history is whitewashed. The history is told by the ones who are ruling the world. So it's like, good luck, man. We know how these Zionists, we know how they control the media, they control the narrative, but through the spirit of Yahweh Shem Shah, man, all these things are being revealed. So yeah, as far as that timeline goes, we know the Scriptures don't cover history as far as Esau migrating north around 1200 to 1100 BC, which is when they say that invasion occurred. But we do know that before Israel had kings, before King Saul, King David, King Solomon, Esau had already kings established. Okay, they did have kings established, and you read that in Genesis 36 and 31. However, it's only stated that they ruled in the land of Edom, okay, which is south of the land of Judea, okay, around Israel, the Holy Land, okay. So it's less likely that it occurred during the 1200 to 1100 BC, okay, less likely to occur during that time, okay. But what we do know, all right, is that, like I said earlier, is according to Genesis 27 and 40, Esau would serve Jacob, the Israelites, until he had the dominion, and he would break that yoke of slavery from off his neck. Okay, when you get the dominion, that's when you begin to rule, right? And in the land of Macedonia, Greece, this is where the Edomites, the so-called white people, this was their first dominion, man. This was their first rule. Okay, and essentially, when they broke that yoke of slavery off their neck was fulfilled in 2 Chronicles chapter 21 and 8. And when you read that, it goes into how the Edomites revolted against King Jeroham, who was the king of Judah. Okay, they revolted against him, and they set up kings. Okay, so that's when they broke free, man. And that period of time would have been around around the 9th century BC. Okay, is when they broke free. Okay, which lines up with the timeline as far as when that Argead dynasty was established, okay, by King Caranus, who was a forefather of Alexander the Great. Okay, it lines up. And yeah, so Edom was in slavery to the Israelites from around 1000 or so BC, which is, when King David became king, around that time, give or take, up until around 850 BC, give or take, when King Jeroham, when those Edomites revolted against him, who was the king of Judah, and that's when they set up their kings. Okay, so yeah, this is when Esau began to set up kings, and they had the dominion, so they began to push forth, in the Japheths territory, and this is when this invasion is more likely to have occurred. Okay, it makes more sense around this time frame, around the 9th century BC, around there. Like I said, which that lines up with the timeline of the archaic period and the creation of these the Greek city-states and these various dynasties that Esau set up. But yeah, man, that is pretty much the history on it, man. And this is something I've been studying for the last several days, but this is when Esau invaded Japheth's lands and took over their identity. Okay. This is when that occurred. Okay. So I want to give all praises to Yahweh Bashim Shah, Waharakakadash. And like I said earlier, this was Alexander the Great came from the Argead dynasty, and he was the Most High rose him up to fulfill prophecy in Daniel chapter 2, as well as Daniel chapter 7. Okay. And from that point on, the Greeks became that next big empire. You had the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and then the Romans. And from that point on, up until where we're at now. All right. But I want to give all praise to Yahweh Bashim Shah, Waharakakadash. Lord willing, it was edifying. Shalom, wa ba ba ba.